A soldier came home from the war to find a homeless man living on his own front porch. The hiss of the bus's air brakes was a sound of finality, a definitive full stop at the end of a 2-year sentence written in sand and heat. Staff Sergeant Cole Anderson swung his duffel bag from the overhead rack, the worn canvas strap digging into the calloused skin of his hand. The weight was familiar, a physical anchor for the formless, heavier burdens he carried inside. He stepped down onto the damp, cracked asphalt of the Oakley Creek bus depot, and the air hit him like a memory. It was cool and smelled of pine needles and wet earth, a world away from the perpetual taste of dust that had coated his tongue for 24 months straight. He'd taken the bus for the last leg. A flight would have been faster, but he wanted the transition. He needed to watch the scorched brown hills of the training base give way to green, to see the country unfold at a human pace, to let the soldier recede and the husband resurface. He had not told Sarah the exact day. The surprise was part of the plan, a scene he had rehearsed in his mind 1,000 times in the suffocating belly of an MSRAP. He would walk up the drive, she would be in the garden or reading on the porch swing, and her eyes would widen. That single moment of recognition was the reward, the medal he actually craved. The depot was empty save for a yawning clerk behind a smudged pane of glass. Outside, the town was quiet. It was mid-afternoon on a Tuesday, a time when Oakley Creek hummed with a low, domestic frequency. Cole started the 2-mile walk home, his boots making a steady, rhythmic cadence on the pavement. A metronome counting him back to a life he'd kept preserved in his mind like a photograph. He passed Mr. Henderson's house, the picket fence still listing to the left like a tired old man. He saw the Simon twins' bicycles lying discarded on a lawn, a silent testament to some forgotten, urgent game. Everything was exactly as it should be, a perfect replica of the town he'd left. The permanence of it was a comfort, a deep and settling balm on the raw parts of his soul. His focus narrowed as he turned onto Elm Street. His pulse quickened, a familiar surge that was once tied to threat, but was now pure anticipation. There it was. Number 214. The small, blue Craftsman with the white trim he and Sarah had painted themselves one blistering July weekend. The great oak tree stood sentinel in the front yard, its branches a familiar, protective canopy. But something was wrong. His internal radar, honed by years of scanning horizons for anomalies, screamed at him. It was a subtle wrongness, a detail out of place. The lawn was too long, the edges shaggy and undefined. The mailbox, usually pristine, sagged slightly on its post, a small metal flag of neglect. And there was a figure on his porch. Cole stopped. His hand tightened on the duffel bag strap, knuckles white. His training kicked in before thought. Threat assessment. Unknown male, stationary, positioned at primary entry point. His posture wasn't aggressive, but it was possessive. He was standing there as if he belonged. He continued forward, his walk no longer a homecoming stroll but a measured approach. Each step was deliberate, his senses on high alert. The man was thin, swallowed by layers of mismatched clothing, a stained fleece over a flannel shirt, grubby jeans. His hair was a matted mess, his beard untamed. A ghost haunting the edges of society, somehow manifested on the one piece of ground Cole considered sacred. A wave of irritation, hot and sharp, cut through his confusion. This was his home. His sanctuary. He pictured Sarah inside, maybe afraid to come out. The protective instinct, the one that had kept his men alive, flared inside his chest. He would handle this. He would remove the threat. He reached the bottom of his own porch steps. The men didn't flinch. He just watched Cole with eyes that were cloudy and distant, as if looking through him, not at him. They were the eyes of someone who had seen too much of the wrong kind of world. Cole knew those eyes. He saw them in the mirror every morning. "Can I help you?" Cole's voice was low, tight. It was the voice he used on patrols, stripped of all emotion, a tool designed for compliance. The man offered no reply. He simply blinked, a slow, languid motion. Before Cole could repeat the question, the front door creaked open. And there was Sarah. For a heartbeat, the world was perfect again. She was just as he remembered, her dark hair tied back, the faint spray of freckles across her nose. But then her expression registered, and the perfect picture shattered into a million pieces. Her face was a mask of shock, her skin pale. Her eyes darted from Cole's face to the disheveled man on the porch, and back again. A terrible, silent communication passed between them. "Cole," she whispered. Her voice was a fragile thing, a breath of glass. Then, she turned her head slightly, her gaze softening as she looked at the homeless man. "Daniel," she said, her tone gentle, familiar. Maybe you could wait in the garden for a little while." Daniel. She knew his name. The word was a gut punch. The air rushed out of Cole's lungs, leaving a vacuum where his joyous reunion was supposed to be. The homeless man, Daniel, gave a slow, compliant nod and shuffled off the porch, his worn boots scuffing against the wood. He moved with a strange, broken grace toward the overgrown backyard. Cole stood frozen on the walkway. The entire world seemed to tilt on its axis. The planned embrace, the tears of joy, the triumphant return, all of it dissolved into a surreal, horrifying tableau. This wasn't a stranger. This was an arrangement. This was a secret he had walked into. The duffel bag in his hand suddenly felt impossibly heavy, filled not with clothes and souvenirs, but with the full, crushing weight of his own absence. He couldn't find his voice. He just stared at Sarah, his wife, who stood in the doorway of a home that was no longer his. Her hand was pressed to her mouth, her eyes wide with a fear he didn't understand. "Sarah," he finally managed to say, and his own name sounded foreign on his lips. "What is going on?" She flinched, pulling her arms around herself as if a cold wind had just blown through the doorway. "Cole. You should have called. You should have told me you were coming." The words were so far from the ones he had imagined that he could only stare. He stepped past her into the house, the home he had dreamed of for 2 years. The air inside was stale, thick with the smell of unwashed laundry and something else, something sad and neglected. A stack of blankets was folded on the end of the sofa, a pillow beside it. Someone had been sleeping there. He dropped his duffel bag on the floor. It landed with a heavy, final thud that echoed in the silence. "Who is he?" Cole asked again, his voice dangerously quiet. He wasn't yelling. In the field, he had learned that the quietest threats were the most serious. Sarah's composure broke. Tears began to trace paths through the dust of shock on her face. "His name is Daniel," she said, her voice trembling. "Please, Cole. Just, let me explain." He turned to face her, his body rigid, his posture a fortress. "Explain what?" "That there's a homeless man living on our porch. That you call him by his name like he's the mailman. That my couch has been turned into a bed." "It's not what you think," she pleaded, taking a hesitant step toward him. He didn't move. "Then what is it, Sarah?" "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like my wife has replaced me with a vagrant." The accusation was ugly, a poison he hadn't meant to release, but the pressure inside him was too great. Her face crumpled. "Replaced you?" "Cole, no. Never." She sank onto the arm of the sofa, her head in her hands. The story came out in broken pieces, a confession born of desperation. It started about a year ago. A military clerical error, a misplaced digit on a form light years away. The allotment checks, the only income she had, simply stopped coming. For 2 months, she lived on savings, calling every faceless bureaucracy she could, getting lost in automated menus and empty promises. Then his unit went dark. A long-range reconnaissance mission. Standard procedure. No communication for 21 days. But the army liaison who called her was new, flustered. He used words like heightened risk and uncertain environment. For 3 weeks, plunged into silence and sudden poverty, Sarah believed he was gone. She grieved him. She held a private funeral for him in the suffocating silence of their empty house. "I broke, Cole," she whispered, looking up at him, her eyes pleading for him to see past the facts and into the heart of her terror. "The silence in this house, it was so loud. I thought I was going crazy. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. I was just disappearing." During that time, with the last of her savings gone and the power company sending notices, she saw Daniel. He was sleeping behind the grocery store, huddled under a thin blanket in the middle of a brutal cold snap. She saw in his vacant eyes the same brand of hopelessness she felt in her own soul. So she did something insane. Something she couldn't explain to anyone. She went home, made a thermos of soup, and took it to him. The next day, she did it again. One night, when a winter storm was rolling in, she told him he could sleep on the porch. He was quiet, and he was harmless. He started tending to the garden, unasked. He would fix loose shingles, sweep the steps. He never asked for anything. He wasn't a replacement, Cole, she said, her voice raw. He was just a presence. He was another person breathing in a world that I thought had forgotten I existed. He kept the silence away. By the time the army had sorted its paperwork and confirmed he was alive, the pattern was set. Daniel was a fixture, a quiet, broken testament to her own quiet, broken period. She was too ashamed to tell Cole, too afraid to ask the men to leave. She had created a fragile, dysfunctional ecosystem to survive, and now he had walked in and turned on all the lights. Cole listened, his rigid posture slowly deflating as her story washed over him. The anger he had been nursing, the sharp-edged blade of betrayal, dissolved into a thick, profound ache. There was no other man. There was no affair. The enemy wasn't a person he could fight. The enemy was a system. It was fear. It was a clerical error and a 21-day silence. He had been half a world away, fighting to keep his men safe, while his own wife was fighting a different kind of war right here. A war of attrition against loneliness and poverty. And she had lost. Or maybe she had won, in the only way she knew how. He felt a wave of guilt so powerful it threatened to pull him under. He had been so focused on his own survival, on getting back to the perfect life he kept in his head, that he never once considered that her world could have collapsed without a single shot being fired. He couldn't stay there. Not yet. The air in the house was too thick with her pain and his own disillusionment. "I need a room," he said, his voice flat. "For the night. I need some space." He didn't wait for her reply. He turned, walked out the front door, and didn't look back. He left his home, his wife, and the quiet man named Daniel behind, and walked toward the anonymous lights of a motel on the highway. The motel room smelled of industrial cleaner and stale cigarette smoke. Cole sat on the edge of the stiff, polyester bedspread and stared at the textured wallpaper, seeing nothing. The silence here was different from the silence in his house. This was an empty silence. The one at home had been full of secrets. His mind, trained for tactical analysis, tried to process the situation. Objective, reclaim life. Threat, the man, Daniel. No, that wasn't right. Daniel wasn't the threat. He was a symptom. A casualty. Just like Sarah. Just like, in many ways, himself. He had come home expecting a victory parade, a private one, just for him and Sarah. Instead, he'd walked into the aftermath of a battle he didn't even know she had been fighting. He felt a bitter irony rise in his throat. He had protocols for everything overseas, rules of engagement, escalation of force, command structure. Here, in the landscape of his own marriage, he had no map. No orders. Did he have the right to be angry? He searched for the feeling, but it was slippery. Underneath it was a deep, cavernous grief. Grief for the homecoming he had lost. Grief for the woman his wife had been forced to become in his absence. He thought of her, alone in that house, thinking he was dead. The thought was a physical blow, knocking the wind out of him. He had been so preoccupied with staying alive for her that he never considered the damage her believing he was dead could do. He lay back on the bed, his boots still on, and stared at the ceiling. He saw two paths. One was the path of righteous anger. He could go back, demand she kick Daniel out, demand she erase this bizarre chapter and return to the life they had before. He could try to force the broken pieces back into their old shape. But he knew, with the certainty of a soldier who understands stress fractures, that things forced back together are never as strong. They just hide the cracks. The other path was harder. It was a path into the wreckage. It required him to accept that the home he had left no longer existed. The woman he had left no longer existed. He no longer existed, not in the same way. They were all survivors of different wars, scarred in different ways. This path demanded not a commander, but a medic. It required him to triage the wounds, his and hers, and figure out what could be salvaged. He looked at his own reflection in the dark television screen. The face looking back was harder than the one that had left. There were lines around his eyes that hadn't been there before. He had been trained to be a protector, a warrior. His mission had been clear: keep the enemy at bay, protect the innocent, defend the line. He realized, in the sterile silence of that motel room, that his mission was not over. It had just changed location. The line he had to defend now ran right through his own front door. The next morning, he didn't check out of the motel. He just drove his rental car back to the Blue Craftsman on Elm Street. He parked across the street, watching the house for a long time, as if it were an enemy compound he was observing before a raid. Then he saw him. Daniel. He was in the backyard, on his knees in the overgrown garden. He was methodically, painstakingly, pulling weeds. His movements were slow but deliberate. There was a strange dignity in the act. He wasn't just loitering, he was tending to something. He was trying to bring order to a small patch of chaos. Cole got out of the car. He had stopped at a diner and bought 2 coffees in styrofoam cups. He walked not to the front door, but around the side of the house, toward the garden. Daniel heard his footsteps and looked up, his body tensing, ready to flee. He looked like a stray dog, conditioned for kicks, not kindness. Cole stopped a few feet away and held out one of the cups. "Coffee," he said. It was not a question or a command. Just a statement of fact. Daniel stared at the cup, then at Cole's face. His own was a mask of confusion. Slowly, hesitantly, he reached out a dirt-caked hand and took it. He cradled the warmth of the cup in both hands, as if it were a small, precious animal. "Thank you," he mumbled, his voice gravelly from disuse. Cole just nodded. He didn't know what else to say. He looked at the patch of earth Daniel had cleared. It was small, but it was a start. He understood then that Sarah hadn't just given this man a place to sleep. She had given him a purpose, however small. And in doing so, he had given her one, too. He left Daniel with his coffee and went to the front porch. Sarah was sitting on the steps, wrapped in a blanket, looking exhausted. She watched him approach, her expression wary. He sat down beside her, leaving a careful foot of space between them. They sat in silence for a long time, watching the morning traffic pass on Elm Street. "The lawn needs mowing," Cole said finally. Sarah let out a shaky breath that was half laugh, half sob. "I know. I'm not okay, Sarah," he said, looking at his hands. "I don't know when I will be. But I think I understand." He told her about the motel room. He told her about the 2 paths. He told her he was choosing the harder one. He didn't make any promises. He didn't offer a simple solution. He just offered his presence. He was here, in the wreckage, with her. That afternoon, Cole used a portion of his substantial back pay to secure Daniel a room at a long-term residential facility on the other side of the county, one that had programs for finding work. He drove him there himself. The ride was mostly silent. As Daniel got out of the car, he turned back to Cole. "She's a good woman," he said. "She saved my life." "I know," Cole replied. Then Cole made another call. It was to a number on a card they gave every soldier on their way out, a number for the Veterans Crisis Line. He didn't call for Daniel. He called for himself. And he asked for a number for couples counseling. He was a soldier, and he knew when he was outmatched. He knew when it was time to call for backup. 3 months passed. The seasons turned, the last of the summer heat giving way to the crispness of autumn. The lawn on Elm Street was mowed and edged. The sagging mailbox was fixed. The house felt different, lighter. The oppressive silence had been replaced by a tentative quiet, the kind that comes after a storm. Cole and Sarah were in counseling. It was difficult, navigating a minefield of unspoken grief and trauma. Their old marriage was gone, a casualty of a long and complicated war. What they were building now was new, fragile, and held together by a shared, painful honesty. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. Cole had taken a part-time job at the local hardware store. The mundane certainty of it, stocking shelves, mixing paint, helping people find the right size screw, was a grounding force. It was a mission with simple, achievable objectives. It was peace. One afternoon, a postcard arrived in the newly repaired mailbox. The picture on the front was of a lake in a state park, the water calm and blue. Cole turned it over. The handwriting was shaky, unfamiliar. It said, "Thank you. I planted some tomatoes." It was signed, Daniel. Cole stood on his porch, the same porch where his world had fallen apart, and held the small piece of cardboard in his hand. He looked through the living room window. He could see Sarah inside, arranging a vase of autumn flowers on the table. She looked up and saw him, and a small, genuine smile touched her lips. He smiled back. He realized then that home wasn't a place you returned to. It wasn't a static photograph you could keep safe in your mind while you were away. Home was something you built. Something you fought for, repaired when it was broken, and rebuilt from the ground up if you had to. It was a mission that was never truly over. And for the first time in a long time, Staff Sergeant Cole Anderson felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be.